Charleston's slave markets processed human lives with mechanical routine, thousands passing through every year, but only once did the auctioneers insist on attaching written warnings to a bill of sale. That document, hidden in a private family collection until the late 1980s, describes a 28-year-old laborer whose last three owners died so strangely that even the Charleston constabulary refused to reopen the inquiries. What made this man so unsettling wasn't rebellion, nor violence, nor any of the behaviors slaveholders feared most. It was something the authorities could not name, something that made seasoned traders silently cross themselves and refuse eye contact with the auction block. Buyers were required to sign an acknowledgement sheet accepting special conditions, though nothing in that clause actually explained the danger. 7 men bid on him that morning. Only one completed the purchase. Before we dive into what happened to the man who ignored every warning, remember this: the stories that survived only in courthouse basements and dusty personal ledgers are the ones that shake our understanding the most. These aren't comfortable tales. They're the ones that were never meant to surface again. Now, take a breath, and let's step into the moment Charleston's most experienced slave dealers would one day call the gravest mistake they ever witnessed. The sale occurred on March 14, 1843, at Ryan's Mart on Chalmers Street, one of the busiest auction houses in the city, and a site where crowds came not for spectacle, but for business. The building still stands today, though few tourists realize what took place behind its pale brick walls. Ryan's Mart specialized in what they termed prime field hands, men who could withstand the brutal rhythm of rice plantations from sunrise to twilight. Every March, demand surged as planters prepared for spring planting. Auctions ran 3 times a week to keep supply flowing north along the Cooper and south toward the Sea Islands. The man who arrived in chains that morning did so under an anonymizing label. The ledger recorded him only as Subject 41, male, approximate 28, origin, Virginia. Being stripped of a name was common. Markets preferred bodies, not identities. Yet the clerk had scrawled something unusual in red ink beneath the entry. Special conditions apply. See manager before bidding. Those 5 words created a ripple of discomfort even before the man stepped onto the platform. Among the buyers in attendance stood Thomas Yancey, a planter who had spent 2 decades honing his ability to judge a man's physical capacity with a single glance. At 46, Yancey owned Belmonte Plantation, 4,000 acres of meticulously organized rice fields carved into the low country 20 miles north of Charleston. He was known for efficiency rather than cruelty, but respect and fear often blurred when it came to men like him. He had arrived that morning expecting a simple transaction: 3 strong workers to replace laborers he'd sold the prior season. He was not looking for mysteries. He certainly wasn't looking for trouble. The morning unfolded routinely through the first 17 lots. Traders barked descriptions while potential buyers examined teeth, checked joints, and inspected for scars that might signal past resistance. Prices were consistent with the season: $900 to $1,200 for strong men, slightly less for women, children valued by projected usefulness. Everything ran like clockwork until Lot 18 was called. 2 handlers escorted Subject 41 onto the wooden platform. Yancey noticed instantly that they stood farther back than they had with any previous lot, an arm's length more, as though proximity itself carried risk. The man in chains was tall, perhaps 6 feet or a little more, shoulders broad, hands marked by years of hard labor. Yet it wasn't his physique that caught Yancey's attention. It was his stillness. His face bore no expression, not dread, not fury, not resignation, only a strange, calm vacancy. His eyes drifted across the crowd as if observing something distant rather than the bidders evaluating him. When the auctioneer began his practiced introduction, those eyes settled on a fixed point above the assembly and stayed there, unblinking. Lot 18, the auctioneer announced, voice full of manufactured enthusiasm. Prime field hand, approximately 28, Virginia lineage, strong constitution. Then he hesitated. Special terms apply. All interested parties must consult Manager Talbot before bidding. A low murmur moved through the crowd. In 20 years of attending these sales, Yancey had never heard such a statement. 3 prospective buyers immediately stepped away from the platform and filed into the manager's office. They returned moments later, 2 shaken, 1 pale as cremated ash. Not a single one resumed his bidding place. As the last man passed Yancey, he muttered, Don't do it, Thomas, not for any price. Yancey felt a tightening in his chest. Alarm, curiosity, or both. The slave stood motionless, unaffected by the whispers swirling around him. That unnatural composure pulled Yancey's attention the way a dark well draws the eye. You know you shouldn't look, but you can't help leaning closer. He stepped toward the manager's office, where 3 men stood waiting ahead of him. Manager Talbot spoke to each in hushed, urgent tones. Those who entered left swiftly. One planter stayed long enough to ask, "But what exactly happened to the previous owners? How did they die?" Talbot shrugged, palms lifted in helpless surrender. "The records are vague, the circumstances troubling. The estate insisted on disclosures. All I can tell you is this. Anyone considering the purchase must understand there are uncertainties." The planter left within seconds. Finally, it was Yancey's turn. Talbot watched him with an expression caught between concern and relief, as if he hoped Yancey might be reckless enough to end a burden the mart no longer wanted to carry. The manager retrieved a small folder and laid out 3 documents, records from 1838, 1840, and an elegantly penned letter written by a lawyer who sounded far more rattled than any lawyer should. Talbot summarized. The man's first recorded owner, a Virginia tobacco planter named Harrison Kemp, had purchased him in Richmond. Kemp died 14 months later, heart failure, though he had been only 43 and reportedly healthy. But the 3 days before Kemp's death were filled with erratic behavior, interrogations, abrupt punishments, disruptions in work routines. Kemp became convinced a conspiracy was forming among his slaves. After one such night of relentless questioning, he was found dead in his barn. No wounds, no struggle, just gone. Yancey listened in stony silence. Talbot continued. The man was then sold to a Halifax County planter named Virgil Stowe, who lasted 11 months before hanging himself, and later to a Richmond merchant, Dobbins, who survived only 6 weeks before collapsing from a sudden stroke. In every case, the owners had descended into identical patterns: sleeplessness, dread, irrational certainty that threats surrounded them. And in every case, this same quiet man had been at the center of their attention. Talbot's final document, a sharply worded letter from Dobbins's estate executor, felt heavier than paper should. The attorney had underlined one paragraph 3 times, stressing that he would not claim the slave caused the deaths, but that the pattern was the darkest coincidence of his 20-year legal career. When Yancey finished reading, he noticed his throat felt dry. Outside, the auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall, calling bids on later lots. Unaware of the strange gravity concentrated in the small office, Talbot studied Yancey quietly and finally asked, "You're still considering the purchase, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. Not really. Yancey returned to the auction floor just as the sale of Lot 18 was preparing to close without a single bid. Subject 41 still stood exactly where Yancey had last seen him, hands shackled, gaze fixed somewhere above the crowd, body as unmoving as if carved from stone. No fear. No anger, no hope. The room felt tense, as though everyone had wordlessly agreed to let the lot pass unsold. Then, with an impulse he barely understood, Yancey lifted his hand. $500, he called. Every head in the building snapped toward him. 500 was far below market value, but given the circumstances, not a single buyer challenged him. The auctioneer's relief was evident. 500 going once, twice. The gavel struck. A sale sealed not by confidence but by uneasy silence. Paperwork concluded quickly. Yancey signed the required acknowledgement of special risks and accepted Talbot's final warning. If anything felt strange, emotionally, mentally, physically, he must document it immediately. The previous owners kept everything quiet until they were too deep into their own spiraling thoughts, Talbot said. If anything begins to shift in your mind, write it down. Yancey left with Isaac, finally learning the name Talbot believed belonged to the man, and arranged for transport to Belmonte Plantation, where 4,000 acres of rice fields awaited his new acquisition. Isaac arrived at Belmonte that afternoon, still bound in leg irons and wrist cuffs. The plantation stretched across the low country like a patchwork of geometry and water, levees, gates, dikes, and irrigation channels that allowed rice to grow in the tidal flats. Yancey ran the estate with strict order but not excessive violence. He believed predictability yielded more profit than cruelty. His overseer, Curtis Beale, was a structured man who didn't rely on the whip unless necessary. Beneath Beale served drivers, enslaved men entrusted with organizing field crews. One of these drivers, Marcus, had worked at Belmonte for 15 years, steady and unshakable. Yancey trusted him the way plantation owners sometimes trusted the enslaved, selectively but sincerely. "Watch him closely," Yancey told Marcus that first evening. "Everything he does, every interaction, anything out of place, you come directly to me." Marcus glanced at Isaac, who stood motionless, awaiting direction, and frowned. "What exactly am I watching for, sir?" Yancey hesitated. How could he explain paranoia without sounding paranoid himself? "Just anything unusual." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's not much to go on." Still, he nodded and led Isaac toward the north fields. The first week passed quietly, almost too quietly. Marcus reported that Isaac worked harder than most, completing every task quickly, precisely, without complaint. He didn't talk during breaks, didn't joke with others, ate alone, slept alone, did nothing to provoke suspicion. And yet, something about that very absence unsettled Marcus. "It's not that he's defiant," Marcus told Yancey. "It's that he shows nothing, not even the small signs a broken man usually shows. It's like he's here, but also not." Yancey felt a tightening in his chest, but dismissed it as nerves. He told himself he wouldn't fall prey to the same irrational thinking that ruined the lives of previous owners. By the second week, Yancey realized Isaac occupied more of his thoughts than any field hand ever had. He found himself glancing from his study window toward the north fields, unconsciously searching for Isaac's figure. At night, he lay awake thinking about the man's emotionless eyes, wondering if anything stirred behind that blank surface. It irritated him. He prided himself on discipline, but he couldn't shake the fixation. One slave shouldn't command this much mental space. Yet he couldn't stop thinking about him. In the third week, the first real disturbance occurred. 2 workers got into a fistfight, something about stolen rations. Routine conflict, easily resolved. But both men insisted the same thing. Isaac had been watching them for days, not interfering, just staring. The stare, they said, gnawed at their nerves until everything felt like a threat. "They're just making excuses," Overseer Beale insisted. "People blame anything but themselves for their mistakes." Still, Yancey ordered Isaac transferred to a different crew, the river team in the South Fields. If trouble followed him there, that would dispel coincidence. Trouble followed. The river team supervisor reported uneasiness. Nothing concrete, just an atmospheric tension that hadn't existed before. Men snapped at each other. Work slowed. No fights, no disobedience, only an inexplicable sense of pressure. When asked for details, several workers echoed what the others had said. Isaac's stillness made them uneasy. His silence felt like something watching them from the inside. "Superstitious nonsense," Beale muttered. But even he couldn't entirely hide a flicker of doubt. That night, Yancey wrote his first journal entry. Initially short and factual. Workers uneasy. Isaac showing no notable behavior, cannot determine cause. Yet something about seeing the words on paper made a knot tighten in his stomach. He set the journal aside, trying to refocus on plantation ledgers, but his mind drifted again and again to Isaac's face, expressionless, vacant, unreadable. Then came the first dream. He dreamt of standing at dawn beside the rice fields, watching his workers move with mechanical precision like puppets. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong, but he couldn't articulate what. Suddenly, he noticed every man staring past him, eyes fixed on someone behind his shoulder. When he turned, Isaac stood at the field's edge, watching him with that same impassive face. In the dream, Yancey felt an overwhelming certainty that a disaster was moments away, that his life, everything he built, was about to collapse. He woke gasping, drenched in sweat, heart thundering. He dismissed it the next morning as stress, until it happened again the next night, and again. Yancey tried to ignore the nightmares, but by the 4th night a creeping dread settled into his bones. He found himself awake at odd hours, staring out the window toward the slave quarters, searching for movement that never came. During the day, his thoughts wandered uncontrollably. He lost track of conversations, reread the same plantation accounts without processing the numbers, and drifted into anxious spirals he couldn't rationally explain. His wife noticed first, asking repeatedly if he was feeling ill. The overseer noticed next, remarking that Yancey seemed strangely preoccupied. Yet through it all, Isaac remained a silent presence in the fields, obedient, tireless, unremarkable, except for how profoundly he affected everyone around him. By the end of April, entries in Yancey's journal grew frenetic, his handwriting tilted, words clustered too close together. He described a sensation of being watched, although every time he turned, no one stood there. He wrote about an unshakable sense of threat without shape, a feeling he could neither justify nor dismiss. He found himself riding out to the South Fields again and again, each time staring at Isaac for several minutes before retreating without saying a word. Curtis Beale, who had known Yancey for years, whispered to Marcus one evening, "He's tormenting himself, though I don't know over what." Marcus only replied, "I think we both know." His eyes drifted toward the quiet figure working in the fading light. It was in early May that the tension reached a breaking point. After another sleepless night riddled with formless fear, Yancey summoned Beale and Marcus to his study. He declared he was selling Isaac immediately. He had already contacted a Savannah trader, someone who specialized in difficult acquisitions, who was willing to take Isaac for $300. A heavy loss, yes, but Yancey didn't care. Beale questioned the decision, arguing that Isaac had caused no actual disruption. Yancey snapped, "He is disrupting operations," his voice sharper than either man had ever heard. The room fell silent. Marcus remained behind after Beale left, studying his master with uneasy concern. "You're afraid, sir," he said, "and I've never seen you afraid of anything." Yancey stared out the window. "I can't explain it," he whispered. "I lie awake certain something terrible is coming. Everything feels dangerous, every shadow, every routine, even my own thoughts. And the only new element here is him." Marcus hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe the danger isn't him. Maybe it's what fear makes us do to ourselves." The words lingered after he left, haunting Yancey deeper than any nightmare. The Savannah trader, Rufus Tate, arrived on May 17th. He examined Isaac with professional detachment, checking limbs, teeth, posture, asking basic questions. Isaac responded obediently but without expression. Tate frowned. "Seems good stock," he said. "So why sell him cheap?" Yancey fed him the prepared explanation about social disruption. Tate narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe you're scared of something you can't admit." Yancey slammed the conversation shut. "300. Take him or leave him." Tate took him. The wagon rolled away with Isaac, and Yancey felt relief crash over him so suddenly he nearly staggered. That night, for the first time in weeks, he slept soundly. The next night passed without dreams. By the third day, color returned to his face. He dared to hope the nightmare was over. Then, on the fourth day, a courier arrived with a letter that chilled him deeper than any bad dream. The letter was from Rufus Tate, but the handwriting was nearly illegible, trembling across the page. Tate wrote that he was returning Isaac immediately and refused payment. He described waking at 2 a.m. the first night with absolute certainty that an intruder moved inside his home. He searched the house repeatedly, unable to shake the conviction of danger despite finding nothing. The second night, he didn't sleep at all, imagining catastrophes with terrifying clarity. Financial ruin, fire, murder, storms, dread without cause. On the third morning, he found the 3 other slaves huddled away from Isaac in their temporary quarters. They said Isaac had stood awake all night staring at a wall, motionless, perfectly silent. Tate wrote one line that echoed Talbot's warning. "It's not what he does. It's what happens to us when we try to understand him." Tate refused even to keep the $300. His final words were a plea. "Do not sell him to anyone you value, whatever this is. It spreads." An hour later, Tate's wagon appeared at Belmonte's gate, the driver urging the horses at a frantic pace. Isaac was delivered back to the plantation, calm as ever. Yancey ordered him locked in the isolation shed without hesitation. Marcus asked whether that was appropriate, considering Isaac had done nothing wrong. "Do it," Yancey barked. Marcus obeyed, guiding Isaac into the windowless shed. The man neither resisted nor reacted. He stepped inside as if entering just another work cabin. Marcus later reported, It's like he doesn't care where he is. He's empty, sir. Not broken, just empty. That night, Yancey sat alone in his study and forced himself to think rationally. He opened his journal and wrote an extended reflection, comparing every documented pattern, from Kemp's paranoia to Stowe's nightmares to Dobbins's spiral into fear. He asked himself whether Isaac truly caused anything. After all, Isaac had never attacked anyone, never resisted, never spoken a threatening word. Yet each owner's mind had deteriorated in identical ways, and the timing aligned too precisely to ignore. Was Isaac the cause? Or was he simply a catalyst revealing terrors that already lived within men like himself? Yancey found no answer, only a sense of tightening dread. 3 days later, he overheard a conversation that shook him deeper than any letter or dream. Samuel, one of the oldest field hands on the plantation, was speaking quietly to Beale. "Masters live afraid," Samuel said. "Afraid we'll rebel, run, poison, burn, or do what they've done to us. They call it caution, but it's fear." Isaac doesn't smile, doesn't cower, doesn't pretend. He refuses to give you the lies that let you sleep at night. That's why he scares you. Not because he does anything, but because he won't perform the part you expect. Yancey stood frozen behind the open window, listening. Samuel's words struck with surgical precision. The fear twisting inside him wasn't new. It had always been there. Isaac had simply stripped away the social masks that made it livable. He was a mirror, not a monster. Samuel's words clung to Yancey long after the conversation ended. He returned to his study shaken, opening his journal again, but the sentences he attempted collapsed into jagged fragments. He reread his earlier entries with new eyes. Every fear he'd documented, every sleepless night, every shapeless dread, had begun as a thought within him, not as an action from Isaac. Isaac had never raised his voice, never threatened, never rebelled, never done anything except stand, work, eat, and live in silence. The terror came from the white men around him. That realization should have comforted Yancey. Instead, it settled like cold iron in his stomach. The next morning, he summoned Samuel and Beale to discuss what he'd overheard. Samuel stood stiff but calm, aware he had spoken boldly. Yancey didn't reprimand him. Instead, he asked, "Have you ever seen anyone like Isaac before?" Samuel considered. "Not exactly, sir. Some men go silent because they're broken, others go quiet because they're fighting. But Isaac, he's separate from all of it. He doesn't participate in the roles we're all trapped in. He's not pretending, not resisting, not pleading. He's just absent. And that absence makes people see things they try not to see." Yancey pressed further. "And the previous owners, they died fearing him. How do you explain that?" Samuel spoke slowly, choosing each word. "Fear can kill a man faster than poison. A man who believes danger is around every corner weakens himself, stops eating, stops resting, makes mistakes, falls apart. Maybe Isaac didn't kill them. Maybe they killed themselves trying to battle their own shadows." Yancey dismissed them, but the conversation echoed in his mind like a tolling bell. That night, he walked alone to the isolation shed, lantern flickering against the darkness. The air smelled damp and metallic. His hand trembled on the lock, but he forced himself to open the door. Isaac sat in the far corner, legs crossed, posture relaxed. Not defiant, not submissive, simply present. When the lantern's glow reached his face, he lifted his head. The expression was the same as always, empty, unreadable, undisturbed. Yancey swallowed hard. "I need to understand," he said. "You've had 3 owners before me. They died. The trader who bought you couldn't keep you 3 days, and I—" He faltered. "I have spent months fearing things I cannot explain. Did you do something to us? Are you doing something now?" Isaac remained still for several long moments, as if considering the question itself. At last he spoke in that flat, emotionless tone. "I worked for Mr. Kemp. I answered him. I followed instructions. He died, and I was sold. I worked for Mr. Stowe. I answered him. I followed instructions. He died, and I was sold. I worked for Mr. Dobbins. He died. I was sold. I work for you. I answer you. I follow instructions. This is all I have done." "But you see the pattern," Yancey insisted, stepping closer. "You must see it." Isaac's gaze remained steady. I see that men who own other men live afraid, some more than others. Some cannot bear the fear. The words struck deep. How are you different from other slaves? Yancey demanded. For the first time since he arrived, something flickered across Isaac's face. Not emotion exactly, but the faintest echo of something long buried. I stopped pretending, Isaac said. Stopped giving masters the expressions they need to believe their world makes sense. No fear for them to dominate, no gratitude for them to savor, no bitterness for them to punish. I stopped all of it. I only work. I only exist, and that honesty frightens people more than rebellion ever has. Yancey felt the truth hit him with painful clarity. Isaac wasn't a threat. He was a reflection, a surface too clean, too honest, too devoid of the social masks that upheld slavery. He left the shed shaken, unable to get the words out of his mind. That night, he wrote a long letter to the Charleston constabulary, detailing everything, the deaths of previous owners, the rising dread at Belmonte, his own dreams and slipping sanity. He explained that Isaac had never committed a crime, yet seemed to provoke dangerous psychological reactions in anyone who tried to control him. It was the closest he had come to admitting he feared his own shadow more than the man locked in his shed. The constabulary responded by sending Deputy James Wilcox, a seasoned investigator known for level-headed judgment. Wilcox spent 2 days interviewing overseers, drivers, and workers. He studied Isaac from a distance, noting his silence, his calm, the absence of any violent behavior. He read through Yancey's journal entries with troubled eyes. On his second night at the plantation, he requested a private talk with Yancey. Wilcox asked the question Yancey had avoided asking himself: has this man ever threatened you? Has he ever shown hostility, ever raised a hand, ever attempted escape? Yancey couldn't speak at first. When he finally answered, it came out strained. No, he has done none of those things. Wilcox leaned forward. Then what exactly are you afraid of, Mr. Yancey? Yancey gripped the edge of his desk, feeling exposed. I'm afraid of what I think when he's near. I'm afraid of my own mind. I'm afraid I'm becoming like the ones who died. Wilcox nodded slowly and revealed something Yancey didn't expect. Your field hand, Samuel, understands this better than you. He told me Isaac's only crime is refusing to play the part slavery demands, that he won't ease your conscience. Wilcox's report concluded that Isaac had committed no crime and therefore could not be punished or seized. The deputy recommended transferring him to state labor projects to minimize one-on-one psychological tension. He added a final line Yancey would reread many times. The greatest danger here may not be the slave, but the fear he awakens in those who claim ownership over him. Wilcox's departure left the plantation strangely quiet. His report provided no solution, only an acknowledgement that Isaac had done nothing actionable. No law in South Carolina covered a slave who frightened his owner without committing any offense. The legal system could not intervene. That left Yancey alone with truths he could no longer deny. The nightmares had eased since Isaac was confined, but an undercurrent of dread remained inside him, like a bruise that refused to fade. He realized he was clinging to fear, even after Isaac's removal from daily life, as though the man's silence had rewired something in his mind. The next few days passed in a haze. Yancey went through the motions of plantation management with a mechanical stiffness, answering questions automatically, issuing orders without conviction. Workers observed him cautiously. His wife hovered with quiet concern. Marcus sensed a shift, not improvement, but exhaustion. On June 8th, Yancey made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He summoned his lawyer to Belmonte and instructed him to prepare papers for Isaac's manumission. I want him freed, he said. The lawyer blinked in disbelief. On what grounds? Yancey hesitated. Let's say he has served me in a way I cannot explain. The lawyer crafted the proper justification: exceptional service, though both men knew it was a polite fiction. For 3 days, Yancey waited while the documents moved through the bureaucratic process. He spent hours pacing his study, rereading Wilcox's report, replaying Samuel's words, revisiting every interaction with Isaac from the moment he stepped off the wagon. He realized with painful clarity that owning Isaac had forced him to see a truth he had never wanted to face, that the entire structure of slavery depended on performance. Enslaved people were forced to smile, to bow, to express fear or gratitude in ways that reassured owners and masked the true imbalance. Without those rituals, the power dynamics became stark and unbearable. Isaac refused to participate in that illusion. His silence stripped the system to its bones. On the morning of June 11th, the manumission papers arrived, stamped and sealed. Under state law, Isaac would have 90 days to leave South Carolina, or risk being seized again. But beyond that, his life would finally belong to him. Yancey personally unlocked the isolation shed and allowed Isaac to step outside for the first time in weeks. The man emerged blinking, though not disoriented. His expression remained unchanged, his posture steady. Yancey told him he was free, that the papers were official, that he now had money and legal status. Isaac accepted the documents with quiet care, folding them once before placing them inside his shirt. "I don't know what you are," Yancey confessed, voice trembling. "I don't know whether you did anything to me or whether I did it to myself, but I cannot continue like this." Isaac regarded him with those hollow, unreadable eyes. "Thank you for my freedom, sir," he said. Then, for the first time, he asked a question of his own. "Do you think you will sleep better now?" The simplicity of the question hit Yancey harder than any accusation. It exposed everything: fear, guilt, the weight of moral clarity he wished he could avoid. He had no answer. Isaac didn't wait for one. He turned and walked down the dirt road leading to the highway as though his path had always been decided. Yancey watched from his study window as the tall figure diminished among the pines. That night, he slept deeply, no dreams, no waking terrors. In the following days, his mind felt clearer, though something permanent had shifted inside him. He was more deliberate in his actions, more attentive in his conversations. He questioned his own motives in ways he never had before. He noticed the way enslaved workers avoided meeting his eyes, how their forced politeness camouflaged discomfort. He wondered how many of them lived in constant silence, hiding thoughts that might bring punishment. Isaac had been a mirror, but now that mirror remained inside Yancey, reflecting truths he could no longer ignore. Plantation life resumed, but not unchanged. Beale commented quietly to Marcus that the master seems different. Marcus agreed. "He's looking at things he didn't want to see before," he said. Isaac didn't break him. Isaac opened him. Whether that opening was a blessing or a curse, neither man could say. The rhythms of Belmonte continued, the flooding of fields, the draining cycles, the tough labor of rice cultivation. But the air felt heavier, as if something unseen lingered. Meanwhile, Isaac's journey did not end at the plantation gate. Records show he appeared in Charleston 4 days later, presenting his manumission papers and purchasing passage to Boston, a city where free black people had a small measure of safety. What followed is hazier. Mentions of a quiet freedman with unsettling silence appear in scattered accounts. A domestic worker in Philadelphia who made a household uneasy. A laborer in New York described as impenetrable. A freedman in Massachusetts whose employer wrote that his silence was a reminder of things I wished not to confront. None of these references are confirmed to be Isaac, yet each contains a faint echo of him. A man whose presence forced others to confront uncomfortable truths. Back at Belmonte, Yancey carried the experience into the years of the Civil War. His journals, donated decades later, reveal a man wrestling with the morality of slavery, questioning the structure he once accepted as natural. He wrote about fear, the fear enslavers felt, the fear they hid behind power, the fear Isaac exposed. One entry from 1862 pondered whether the Confederacy was facing the same revelation he had, that once enslaved people stopped performing compliance, the entire system collapsed. He wrote, "Isaac was the first honest thing I had ever seen within this institution. He did not play his part, and without that performance, the truth became unbearable." By the time emancipation became reality, Yancey had already undergone his own internal reckoning. He never saw Isaac again, but the man's absence haunted him as much as his presence had. He often wondered whether Isaac understood the impact he had, or whether the silence was simply his way of surviving a world designed to crush him. Some nights Yancey imagined Isaac walking freely through northern streets, still carrying that mirror with him, showing people, black and white alike, the parts of themselves they tried to hide. The isolation shed where Isaac spent his final weeks at Belmonte did not vanish with him. Somehow it outlived the rice fields, the overseers, the Yancey family, and even the system that built it. Today, the structure stands on preserved land, part of a historic site where visitors file through in small groups. They walk across the same dust floor, pass their hands over the same rough boards, and stare at the same door that once closed between Isaac and the outside world. The walls are bare. The room is small. Nothing about it screams horror, until you listen to what it represents. A man was locked here, not for rebellion or violence, but because his silence terrified people who held his life in their hands. Tour guides share a simplified version of the story. They talk about an enslaved man tied to 3 mysterious deaths and a fearful planter who ultimately freed him. They mention strange coincidences, mounting unease, and the unusual step of manumission. But they tend to skim past the deeper question: why did a man who followed every order, who never raised a hand in defiance, become the most frightening presence on that plantation? The tours are designed for tourists who want history packaged neatly. There's little room for the raw, unanswered parts. Yet the record, letters, journal entries, official reports, keeps circling back to the same disturbing idea. It wasn't what Isaac did. It was what other people felt when they looked at him and found nothing to cling to. No soothing smile, no practiced fear, no grateful performance, just an empty surface that reflected their own thoughts back at them. For 3 owners and at least 1 trader, that reflection was unbearable. They called him cursed, dangerous, unnatural. But Isaac himself described his crime in simpler terms. He stopped pretending. That refusal to pretend may have been the sharpest blade he ever carried. Plantation society survived not only on chains and whips, but on emotional theater, on enslaved people forced to act out roles that justified their bondage in the eyes of those who profited from it. Fear had to look like respect. Hatred had to be hidden under bowed heads. Suffering had to be wrapped in the appearance of obedience. Isaac stripped all that away. He gave his owners nothing but work and silence. No comfort, no absolution, no illusion that the system was anything but what it truly was. Yancey understood this more fully as the years went on. He wrote that freeing Isaac felt like closing a book he wasn't strong enough to keep reading. But even after Isaac was gone, the questions stayed. How many other planters were quietly haunted by fear long before Isaac ever appeared? How many lives ran on the same hidden terror, that the people they claimed to own had every reason to hate them, and one day might stop pretending they didn't? Isaac did not bring that fear into their hearts. He simply refused to cover it up for them. As the Civil War tore the South apart, that same dynamic played out on a grand scale. Enslaved people began walking away from plantations, refusing to maintain the old performances. What slaveholders called insurrection and lawlessness was often just what Isaac had modeled years earlier, people stepping out of roles written for them by others. Yancey watched this unfold and recognized the pattern. The system wasn't collapsing because enslaved people became more dangerous. It was collapsing because they stopped helping their oppressors lie to themselves. So was Isaac truly dangerous? That depends on what you think danger looks like. If danger means a knife in the dark, a planned revolt, a burning barn, then no, he wasn't dangerous at all. He never lifted a weapon, never plotted an uprising, never cursed his captors within the record. But if danger means forcing a society to see what it is actually doing, if it means stripping away stories that allow cruelty to feel normal, then Isaac might be one of the most dangerous people that world ever produced. His presence cracked the story slaveholders told themselves about power, obedience, and righteousness. Maybe that's why his story still clings to the place where he once lived and to the records he left behind without meaning to. He is a reminder that some of the most unsettling figures in history are not the loudest or the most violent. They are the ones who stand in the middle of a lie and simply refuse to take part. They say nothing, they play no role, and that absence pulls the mask off everyone around them. So now the question turns to you. When you think about Isaac, this quiet man who walked through slave markets, plantations, and perhaps free cities without ever offering the expressions people expected, what do you see? Do you think he carried some dark force that infected the minds of those who tried to own him? Or do you believe those men were finally confronting their own fear, guilt, and buried knowledge of what slavery truly was? Was Isaac a curse? Or just a man who stopped helping others hide from themselves? Tell me what you think. Do you believe Isaac caused the dread that followed him? Or was he simply the mirror that made that dread impossible to ignore? Share your thoughts, your theories, your own reading of his silence. And if stories like this, stories that drag hidden histories into the light and refuse to make them comfortable, speak to you. Make sure you stick around for more. There are countless other mysteries buried in ledgers, courthouse files, and family papers, all waiting for someone willing to look directly at them without pretending.